Yes, here.
What do you think about the reduction in interest in the anti-war movement in general since Obama's election? It seems that you're right in that a big part of the country was very energetic and got behind criticisms of Bush and the war and the encroachment upon our freedoms, but I felt like when after January 20th there was just absolute silence. And there are still the diehard anti-war protesters following John Woo around the country while he makes his lecture circuits. But, where is the criticism of the current administration? Is this just a party line issue where the people who really cared most about it cared most about getting Democrats back in office, and now that that's been done, they're willing to turn their eyes to what's going on? And, is there any hope that there will be the same kind of criticism and uproar and attack that we saw against Bush, against Obama, now that he's clearly, I think, shown that he's not willing to follow through on any of his campaign promises in this regard?
Largely, yes. Not entirely, but largely, yes. And it's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen or been able to even imagine. People were pretending to not like wars because they were Republican wars. And when they became Democratic wars, they were okay. They were good wars now. We're not going to talk about them anymore. I mean, what could be more revolting than that? And so you have, big groups like MoveOn.org that are getting everybody to I mean, and even then they were only doing it in districts where the Congress member was a Republican. So it wasn't exactly a secret what they were about, but they were organizing anti-war vigils and rallies and so forth. And, that's just gone because the wars are Democratic wars now. It's virtually gone. There's signs in that group and many others of progress in the right direction beginning. But yeah, overwhelmingly, the major peace organizations were defunded. Some were shut down in November of 2008. And when they ought to, realistically, and buying into the whole rhetoric of go out there and make me do it, they realistically ought to have been expanded and invested in. If you actually think you have someone who might listen to you now, that's the time to speak up. There's nothing more disrespectful than treating the new guy like a dictator and going home and staying out of the way. That is not how you behave in a representative government. Your job, your part of the deal when you elect someone is that you're going to tell them how to represent you. And so, I mean, it's the anti-war movement was always underrepresented in the media and continues to be. It is a lot bigger and more active now than you think, and that was always the case. But it is a lot smaller now and has been a lot smaller for the past year and a half. But it's growing, and this event at Perriello's today, similar events are happening at over 100 Congress members' district offices all over the country and have been for 6 months, and Congress members are talking about it and feeling pressure from that. There were a couple of dozen people acquitted in Washington yesterday for having gotten arrested protesting torture. There are, efforts happening all over the place, and we actually do have something of an easier fight because it's dragged on so long, because it's cost so much money, because the wars are so unpopular, because the economy's in such bad shape, that you have someone like Congressman David Obey possibly taking helpful steps. This is a guy who claims to have helped end the Vietnam War, who has been there for decades, who's a supposedly progressive liberal Democrat. He's from Wisconsin, and he's the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And he's been, a critic and opponent of these wars for years now, but for the past 3 years has been in charge of funding them. And has screamed at a friend of mine, and we YouTubed it and got it on all the television networks for asking him to stop funding the wars. He was going to end them by funding them and so forth. Well, lately he's been talking about not funding them, and 6 months ago he was swearing he wouldn't fund them unless we instituted a war tax. So you had to pay a war tax on your tax form, and then he would fund the wars with that new tax. he caved in last summer, of course, and at which time he swore he would never do another one of these emergency bills. But here it is. Well, what he said yesterday was that he's going to sit on this bill and not bring it up in the Appropriations Committee until we fund jobs and teachers and useful things. Now, what I want him to say is we're going to actually fund jobs and teachers and useful things, but not the war. We're going to use that money to fund this, But he's moving in the right direction, and he's retiring. He's got a few months, 6 months left on the job, and there is the possibility of influencing somebody like that to make his final act in office not be further funding the escalation of a war he claims to hate. And we can accomplish that with enough pressure through his colleagues. So if we can get to Perriello, and Perriello can put in his word with Obie, it can help.
One more.
Yeah, and then we'll go somebody else.
We only read an excerpt of your book, but it seems that in one part you seem to almost treat Lincoln favorably, and I was wondering what you felt about Lincoln maybe being one of the first presidents to really overstep his constitutional authority during a time of war, encroaching upon freedoms, issuing a warrant for the arrest of the Chief Justice after he said he didn't like his habeas corpus policies. What do you think about that, and what other presidents do you think have really kind of set the stage to go what we're seeing now?
Well, I'm not a scholar of Lincoln, but what I know of him, I see a lot that's positive and a lot that's negative. And it wasn't, just randomly wartime. He was responsible for making it wartime. And I believe in the book I may have mentioned that it might have been wiser not to make it war. The gentleman who asked the earlier question may recall better than I, but I don't think we had to have that war. I think that an independent nation north of the southern states that did not return slaves to their owners and did not provide industry for the South, might have ended slavery as well and as swiftly as a war that killed hundreds of thousands of people. And so I'm not a big fan of wars or of stripping away people's civil rights with the excuse of war. And so I do have quite a few problems with Lincoln, who of course is cited by people like John Yoo as one of the past heroes who committed similar heroic abuses. And I think that it's been a gradual process that has been assisted by Republicans like Lincoln, our last decent Republican in some ways, and Democrats like FDR and Truman, and going back to people like Thomas Jefferson, that has made the presidency something radically different from what it was. But I think it can be well argued that the additions to presidential power that happened under Bush and Cheney's co-presidency were as big or bigger than anybody who came before them, and they were adding to what all of their predecessors had piled up. But now you had Obama come in, and John Dean, who worked in Nixon's White House and has his own abuses to answer for, predicted that whoever came after Bush was going to be either the best or at least the second worst president ever. Those were his only two choices, because he could either come in and treat Bush and Cheney's abuses as aberrations and crimes and prosecute them and undo them, or he could cement them in place, which is, of course, what Obama is doing. So that, again, in some ways, Obama is the most abusive president we've ever had, because he's building on what all of them have accumulated. Rarely has anything been taken back, and never has a president come in and said, I want to give back all the powers that my predecessors had. And the millions of Obama voters who swore that Obama was going to do that, and that Obama was going to be better than what he campaigned as, that he was secretly plotting to be the first politician in the history of politics to perform better, not just fulfill 3/4 of his promises, but he's secretly not promising all the good stuff. These are people whose disappointment is self-inflicted, and I think that Obama follows Lincoln a little too much in some ways. There was, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask, one is, you can just give a short answer, maybe a short explanation, but do you think Obama will be reelected? And then secondly, I was wondering if you say a little bit more about what you think actually the United States should do in regards to Afghanistan. You said that, instead of sort of pulling away from the war, actually escalating it, but what would you say to someone who say that, we've created this mess, whether it's illegal, immoral, what have you, do we have an obligation to sort of ensure that we don't leave it worse than we actually found it, or do we, what's our obligation there, legally, morally, whatever, and especially because it seems, especially now that we have a real interest in either maintaining a presence there or making sure that things are stabilized, just because I don't know if you read the other day that really I thought was sort of suspicious, but they found I guess some of the world's largest mineral reserves in Afghanistan. I think it was in the New York Times, of lithium, copper, iron. It's going to put Afghanistan on the map, and already like China is making attempts to sort of get into that. Russia and Iran and Turkey, they're all trying to sort of gain control over the up and coming Afghan economy. So, what would you say about those issues?
Well, the shortest answer I can give to a will Obama be reelected is maybe. But I think that one of the factors that could make it much less likely is Afghanistan. I think that if I were to go to your house and break in the window at night and smash up half the furniture and camp out in the living room, I wouldn't have a moral obligation to stay for the next month and leave on a responsible pay. I would have a moral obligation to go down the street and turn myself into the police. Right? That would be my moral obligation. And so this, you broke it, you own it. If another nation invaded our country and smashed the place up, and we said, get the hell out, and they said, no, we have a moral obligation, we broke it, now we own it. The hell you do? It's our country. And this is what the people of Afghanistan say. And this coming assault in Kandahar, the plan was to get all the local councils to approve it. Right? The U.S. Army paid for a survey to see who would approve, who supported this idea. 94% of Kandaharis are opposed. And 85% of them see the Taliban, whether they support it or not, as our Afghan brothers. 85%. If there were an Arizona-style law in Afghanistan where you had to go and question anybody who looked like they didn't fit, guess who would match the profile, right? Guess who's never going to be seen as our Afghan brothers, right? And the majority of Americans want us to get out. Right? It's a slim majority, like 53%, and all they do is say it and go back and watch TV, but it's a majority. Overwhelming, 90% of Afghans, and more in Kandahar than in valleys that haven't been bombed, but the majority of Afghans want us to get out. If you could do a survey of members of the U.S. military, because they were done a number of times during this war in Iraq, almost certainly you would find 3/4 wanting to get out soon. So, we're doing this in the name of democracy, but what sort of democracy? Which group are we representing in doing this? It's not that everything will be wonderful when we do get out. It's that everything is going to continue to be horrible as long as we stay. And the longer we stay, the more damage will be done, and the more, the deeper trouble the place will be in when we do get out. To the extent that on our way out, or even after we're out, we can find a way to legitimately fund a decent economy, a non-drug industry, whether it has to do with mining lithium or anything else, we should do that. I mean, we owe these people. We've destroyed their country for 3 decades. We got the Soviets to go in and destroy their country. We have not been good to them for a long, long time. But to say that therefore we own the place and we have to get out responsibly, I think is to miss what the problem is. And if you're dealing with the question of law and whether we want other nations to have any sort of deterrence on attacking each other, to have in place in the world the idea that nations should not invade each other, and that when they do, they don't then have an obligation to stay. They have an obligation to get the hell out. Then we have to get out. The sooner the better. And we can't financially afford it. It's an incredible drain. These mineral riches, have been known about for decades and have not been out of the calculation behind this whole thing, which has also included the need to put a pipeline across Afghanistan for liquid riches, and have been known about in this level of detail. Every detail in that story has been known about for years. James Risen is an interesting guy. This guy who wrote this story, who gave us the NSA spying story, but let the New York Times sit on it until Bush could get in for a second term, and who has many other stories in his book that had the spying story that have yet to hit the newspapers, but and is an excellent reporter. But he was fed this by the Pentagon. I think he was duped pretty well, and I think he thought it was a scoop. But I think the major purpose of putting this on the front page of the New York Times and having everybody exclaim it as a new find was to influence members of Congress into thinking that there was some reason to stay in Afghanistan, because they are really starting to doubt it. The hardcore warriors are starting to doubt it, since all the evidence is against it. And yet, what a disgusting and illegal rationale for staying in Afghanistan, to make use of their resources. I mean, that is a crime. That is not a justification. Yes.
I was gonna ask about if you feel the same way about the war in Iraq, just because I've read a lot about how a lot of people think one of the biggest mistakes that the Bush administration did going in was disabling the army, and just because now there's so much sectarian issues there that the army isn't weak enough now, the new army that they've tried to build up is too weak to deal with it. So if we got out, it would just be, like a lot of people think, it would be complete chaos.
Empires like sectarian division, I mean, sectarian division is created between North and South Vietnam, every different pocket of Yugoslavia. Every empire loves divisions, whether they're there or not, or whether they were there before you created them or not. And yet, the people of Iraq will tell you overwhelmingly, from every religious sect, get the hell out. And if we do not, even with over 1 million dead and millions displaced and everyone else ruined and traumatized, and the country turned into a hell on earth, you are going to see massive violent resistance come the end of next year if we are not out. These are, one of the nice powers that Bush established was the power to go make a treaty without the United States Senate. And he and Maliki made this treaty, which was discussed in the Iraqi press and by Iraqi civil society during this hellish war, and which was only guaranteed to if the Iraqi people got to vote it up or down. Well, they've been denied that vote, but they are counting on the United States getting out, completely out, not leaving forces and calling them non-combat forces and so forth. And if that doesn't happen, there is going to be serious violence in Iraq, and one of the reasons that the violence has gone down is that the U.S. troops have pulled back and are not creating the target that they used to. There are, of course, as with any occupation, groups in the Iraqi government that benefit from the occupation and want it to continue. And our generals are out there every day saying, if this violence continues or gets out of hand, we might have to delay the withdrawal a little bit. We'll see. That just encourages that violence and encourages that storyline. Whereas, overwhelmingly the people of Iraq want us to get out. And their country, too, will be a terrible place to live when we get out. But it's a terrible place to live right now, and has been during this whole occupation. Certainly it was a mistake strategically to disband the Iraqi army. But the moral and legal mistake was to be in that country at all, and every instant that we've been there to refuse to leave. This is the most blatant example of a war of aggression that has to be ended and has needed to be ended every moment that it's gone on. Yeah.
I'm just going to describe the current, geopolitical situation, give an argument for the war, and I was wondering, it seems like you're against the war, so if you could give an argument in response. It's just that since the U.S. is the only global superpower now, and that it just seems rational to secure resources for the global economy. What I mean is, if other countries, as they grow, China, Brazil, India, as their economies grow, they're going to need oil and other resources like raw materials, minerals, oil, metals. I see it as a competition for limited resources. And if that's the case, since the U.S. is currently the only superpower, it seems almost rational to start securing resources such as oil in the Middle East. And if we don't do it, then other countries will. I know it's not very moral, but it just seems like the reality of the situation. And I think that without doing these things, I'm not sure if the stagflation of the Reagan era might be the consequence of not having enough oil and so forth, and that might have shocked the American psyche. A lot of us interns weren't born then, around that era. We didn't even come into existence yet, but I'm not sure if the people, generally American people, are afraid of not acquiring enough resources and going back to the stagflation era of the Reagan period.
Well,
I hope I was clear. I'm sorry.
Very clear. It's a good question. One point I think is that you sound like you agree with me that Bush didn't honestly believe in the dangerous weapons of mass destruction. This is a war, among other things, for oil. But there are of course two major problems with oil. One is that burning it destroys our planet. The other is that fighting wars for it kill masses of people and wound and traumatize masses of additional people. And most commentators who have ever described war as rational have never been to war. But the other factor that people seem to set aside with regard to oil is that whether we kill millions of people over the last buckets of it, and whether we use every last drop of it or not, it is going to be gone relatively soon, one way or the other. And we have the sun shining on our country. We have the wind blowing across our country. We don't have to secure that stuff. We don't have to go thousands of miles away and steal it from other people at the cost of millions of lives to quote unquote secure it. We just have it. We have to develop the capacity to use it. We are a nation that has been driven radically off course by subsidizing the oil and nuclear and coal industries and ignoring energy that is free but somehow not macho enough. Well, why, given the undisputed fact that the oil is going to run out relatively soon, would the rational thing be to try to use every last drop of it and kill a lot of people in the process before we're forced to shift to something else? Why wouldn't it be more rational to go ahead and shift to something else now and avoid having to destroy the atmosphere and kill millions of people and generate terrorism, not fight it, but generate it in the process? Why is that rational? I respectfully disagree. Are we let maybe take one more question? I don't know if we're out of time or not, but yes, sir. Go ahead.
You seem to be very anti-nuclear power. Am I reading that right? You're not very pro-nuclear power. Okay. Because it's environmentally unfriendly. Is what I mean.
A lot of reasons I can tell you, but go ahead.
But that would be. I'm just so I understand what your position is before I ask my question.
Well, if one of those planes that had flown into the World Trade Center had flown a few miles off course into a nuclear power plant, thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of people would have been killed.
Not necessarily.
Yes, necessarily.
Well,
necessarily, and many of them slowly and painfully. Nuclear power, having this non-proliferation regime where nations are like Iran are allowed to have nuclear power but not nuclear weapons creates an unavoidable problem, because nations are very much closer to having nuclear weapons when they have the nuclear power, in addition to having this incredible danger on their hands. And so you create a situation that is almost guaranteed to lead to nuclear war, which is almost guaranteed to kill all of us. And we have gone in the last several years to a significantly higher percentage of the nations in the world having nuclear weapons, and countless nuclear weapons unaccounted for, while generating terrorism around the world. This is not a good recipe.
That would be correct if nuclear power was able, if uranium and that was used for nuclear power was able to create a nuclear weapon, which it's not. The reason I asked, my fiance's father actually works with Ariba, the nuclear power company, and in conversations with him and then research on my own, it seems that the evidence shows that, first of all, nuclear power is fairly environmentally friendly, especially considering coal and oil, in that a 10 by 10 by 10 by 10 room could power the entire city of New York City for 10 years. As such, furthermore, the safety measures taken by nuclear power plants today, absent something like Chernobyl, which essentially the Russians removed most of the safety measures, contain or are built to contain, even in the case of a reactor meltdown or a plane strike. Absent a extraordinary weapon hitting it, like an extraordinarily powerful weapon, much greater than a jet plane, for example, a large bomb of some sort, actually hitting it. The safety measures in place to contain a nuclear radiation leak are so great that to make it not maybe completely impossible, but extremely, extremely improbable. As such, since that's there, how is it that you say it's not really environmentally friendly? I mean, there's no emissions from a nuclear power plant. All you have is a small amount of nuclear waste, which, if we take the French model, for example, can be reused. And then not safe, when the only leak that has harmed anyone outside of the nuclear power plant was Chernobyl. 3 Mile Island didn't actually get past the second layer of defense, so the second safety layer, there were 4. As such, how is it that it's not environmentally friendly or safe, at least reasonably safe?
Well, 3 Mile Island killed a great many of people over the years following the occurrence, and most of the reporters who went and reported on the original incident didn't live too long. And you have I would recommend to you a new book called Apocalypse Never, and I would appreciate any reading you could recommend to me. But you have nuclear power plants that can be destroyed, that our own government has tested whether people can infiltrate and easily take the actions that would be needed to blow the thing up, and they can. And these are sitting terrorist targets. But the fact that the same uranium can't be immediately used in weapons doesn't change the fact that when nations like the prominent example of Iran are permitted to have uranium for power, those who are legitimately suspicious or just want an excuse to bomb Iran, as the case may be, are going to claim that they're processing that uranium for weapons. And you don't have that situation if you don't have the nuclear energy there. On top of which, we're theoretically a capitalist society. Nuclear energy doesn't make any money, has to be heavily subsidized. You cannot find a private insurance company that will insure it because of the risks that you are writing off. If you could make your case to a private insurance company, then you could come back and make it to me. Instead, our government, with our money, public dollars, the ones that have to bail out Wall Street when it screws up, are on the line to bail out all of the nuclear power plants, without which none of them would exist. They can't make it in a capitalist society. We subsidize them by dealing with the waste, which you ignore, but it only lasts for trillions of years, and we haven't figured out a damn thing you can do with it. To my mind, that might be better than quickly destroying the planet with oil. But why is it better than using the sun and the wind and the heat and the waves that don't actually destroy anybody? It doesn't quite reach that level, and with the dangers involved, with the same defunded clowns that were overseeing BP, overseeing the nuclear industry, I would feel safer without it around. Yeah.
Hi, I was very heartened by your response to the prior question about that characterized the purpose of nations in terms of struggle over limited resources. And I'm wondering if you would endorse a different model of what nations might be about. That is, that I think of the Enlightenment writer Emmanuel Vattel, who spoke of there being a community among nations, and maybe even the idea that a nation exists in competition for limited resources has been mass media fed to us to try to promote a certain kind of consumer society that doesn't question its purposes.
Yeah, I mean, look at this AP story a couple days ago about how we need the oil, not just for our cars, but we can't have soda bottles and shaving cream and every product in your house without, they used to say the same thing about whale blubber. It's nonsense, and to fight wars for it is insanity, and to fight wars for our standard of living and our imperial status. When past empires, including our good buddies over in England, their own people in the so-called homeland have been better off when they shut down the empire, and we could be better off being friends with other nations than we are as being, the dominant enemies of other nations. And someone brought up the need to, secure resources. When Iran tries to non-violently, peacefully, diplomatically, politically have influence in the countries neighboring it, we talk about that as destabilizing those countries. Right? When we go and invade and occupy and kill people in those, we talk about that as stabilizing and securing those countries. That's purely from our distorted point of view as a nation that should be grotesquely privileged above all others. We have 5% of the people and use 25% of the resources and produce more than that of the pollution, and pay less attention to that other 95% of the world than anybody anywhere else pays to countries outside of them. We are far too blindered and isolated and too nationalistic. And we certainly need to look to examples of things like the European Union, where nations have grouped together economically and diplomatically and politically and in terms of human rights standards, not through military occupation. And what that's done as a carrot for countries like Turkey in terms of imposing reforms that would allow them to join the European Union has been so much more effective than what we've done in places like Iraq and Afghanistan by bombing them. it's stupid on its own terms. It doesn't work. It doesn't produce, and it doesn't even steal their resources. As was mentioned, China is going into Afghanistan and into Iraq. In fact, the Iraqi government, our puppet as it might be, is privileging nations that didn't support invading its territory. And it's, no one's going to dispute the macho claim that we've got the most weapons. It's just that we could have thousands of times as many weapons as we have, and we still couldn't do the things we imagine we can do. It can't be done. It's stupid on its own terms, and we're going to have to wake up to it. We don't have a choice.
David has to go, right? Where is the more information on the protest that you're invited to?
Well, the address, it's at noon. Get there a little early if you can. If you get there late, please come on and join us just in the office, and you feel free to take your turn and say something or not to say anything. Most people won't say anything.
Ben can get you some directions to the office, right?
It's 313 2nd Street Southeast.
It's around the corner.
It's the
from
glass
West
building.
Garage
It's
to the south.
right. If you're near the downtown mall, on the south side of the downtown mall, there's a big parking garage. And there's a street that goes by the side of that, goes across the railroad tracks, and then on your left, there's a glass building.
That's where Blue Dust Grill and Excellent.
Exactly. When you see those, go to the next corner and turn left, and then take a left into the parking lot if you don't see us there on the street.
I speak a bigger
I'm sorry?
Speak language center?
Yes, it's near the Speak Language Center, and that street. Garrett Street. Okay, so turn left on Garrett Street, and in fact, join us on the sidewalk next to Garrett Street just before 12 o'clock. But the actual address, if you want to MapQuest it, is 313 2nd Street Southeast.
Thank you very much, David.
Oh, thank you.